Caesar is ZenlessZoneZero's amazing new agent with absolutely insane potential. Her ability to stun, provide fast assists, shields, and attack buffs make her a top choice for many teams. She also excels in both anomaly and crit focus teams, making her strong in a wide range of compositions. Additionally, her kit is easy to use and highly effective, making her perfect for players of all kinds. Guys, before I go further though, this guide does feature footage from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change, but enough stalling, let's break down everything you need to know about how to make Caesar overpowered. Caesar is a supportive utility buffer who can alternate between being on field briefly and for longer periods. She offers fast assists, chain attacks, and an accessible EX special, all of which contribute to one of the most smooth gameplay experiences you'll ever see. Her playstyle is comparable to Seth and Lucy, but her unique strength lies in providing protection and temporary immunity to enemy interruptions. Though she is not always better than other supports, she excels in boosting damage through debuffs and attack buffs, which make her insanely strong and almost irreplaceable for hyper carry team. Let's begin this kit breakdown talking about Caesar's unique resource. As you might have noticed when seeing gameplay surrounding her, Caesar does not have a resource bar or resource stacks the same way that other agents do. Instead, she has a barrier with a long set duration and durability that decreases whenever it gets hit. This barrier is her core passive and is applied whenever she uses an EX special, chain attack, or ultimate. The barrier is transferable to other agents when she swaps off field, and the size of it is dependent on her impact. The shield has an attack buff tied to it whenever it is present on an agent, and the amount of attack gained is dependent on her core skill, with a maximum of 1000 attack being received. One of the biggest strengths of the barrier is its anti-interrupt, which does prevent characters from being flinched or interrupted easily. But another fantastic feature of this barrier is that it can't be broken in one hit, regardless of how much damage is dealt. When it is gone, however, the attack buff disappears after 5 seconds, but Caesar can transfer it to an ally before it fades. On a final note, while the anti-interrupt, damage mitigation, and attack buff are powerful, they can actually work against each other. The more Caesar reduces damage and prevents knockbacks, the more likely the shield will break, causing her to lose the attack increase. It's not that big of a deal since it's easy to reply her shield via EX special, but I did feel it was worth mentioning. Caesar's additional ability is also one of the easiest to activate, assuming you avoid pairing her with ranged agents. However, this isn't even the best part about it. With it active, Caesar strengthens her team utility by applying a debuff to all nearby enemies that increases the damage they take by 25% for 30 seconds. This is honestly an extremely long time and basically makes it a permanently active debuff, but do know that this is usually best applied against multiple enemies using her charged basic, or against individual enemies by applying her defensive assist or using a perfect block against a single enemy. If you do want to pair her alongside ranged agents like Zhu Yuan, you can overcome potential synergy issues by taking defensive assist characters like Nicole, who then do activate the additional ability instead. Now let's take a look at her basic attack. Caesar's 6-part attack combo does okay damage and some days, but this is typically not used in favor of her other skills. Her charged basic attack, however, is important for 3 reasons. Assuming you have Caesar's additional ability activated, she can first apply a damage increasing debuff to multiple enemies using the skill. Secondly, the move slightly vacuums and groups enemies together. And finally, it also does give her invincibility, which is something that almost no other basic attack can do. This is nice in terms of giving Caesar's team more options for approaching combat, but do know that this costs an assist point to perform well and will require you to manage this resource more carefully, especially if you are reliant on using defensive assists on your Caesar. Caesar's special attack is probably the most complicated part of her entire kit. There are several parts to it and conditions that change what it actually does, but let's address a few things first. First, part of Caesar's special attack is a passive that increases Caesar's impact for 3 seconds when she triggers a perfect block, retaliation, or defensive assist. We'll get into what each of these things are, but let's start with retaliation. Retaliation is a state that Caesar enters when she is attacked by the enemy, and there are a few ways for this to activate. When she performs a defensive assist and is technically hit by the enemy, or when she is actually just hit by the enemy throwing an attack at her, she is entered into the state. Specifically for retaliation, activating this condition is very helpful at times because it allows Caesar to cast an additional EX special at a reduced cost. Perfect block refers to when Caesar aligns the cast of her EX special at the right moment to block the enemy's attack, and well, a defensive assist is a defensive assist. We'll get to that later though. To make things easier, here's what you need to know about the energy consuming special attack, which is what most players will end up using. Caesar has 2 EX special attacks, each with unique animations, effects, and multipliers, but they do share some key features. Here's what they share in common. Both can block enemy attacks for a perfect block and also simultaneously simultaneously generate a shield for Caesar the moment they are cast, and both can also refund the energy cost regardless of which kind of EX special was performed when doing it. And here's how they differ. The first EX special is a forward strike that deals physical damage, while the second is a follow-up shield bash that deals even more damage and daze. A perfect block with the first EX special adds an extra shield bash, and this is something that the second actually can't do. In general though, her EX special is used the following way. Immediately cast an EX special, following a defensive assist and after you're in the retaliation state, and otherwise just perform a perfect block and then cast the second part of her EX special to reduce the overall energy cost and also add more daze to the enemy. Before we dive into Caesar's assists, however, I do want to make an observation about the state of assists in ZenlessZoneZero. Given the rise of Jane, there have been an increasing amount of damage dealers who want more field time. Since this is the case, it is much more common for supports to reduce their overall field time to allow their damage dealers to, well, deal more damage. This isn't a problem necessarily, but it does mean that assists and how impactful they are more important to factor. An agent like Seth, for instance, is one of the best characters for this, since he can provide his anomaly buff just from performing a defensive assist and then stays off field until it's about to fall off. Caesar shares a similar quality to Seth here, since he doesn't need to be on field for very long depending on what team composition you're running, but Caesar is used in place of stunners in some teams and therefore may actually want to be on field instead of just assisting. However, her assists apply an amazing amount of days and also come out quickly, so you'll have to weigh your options wisely. Here's where things get interesting. First and foremost, Caesar is unique because she sometimes prefers getting hit, as we mentioned with her EX special. This is because she gains the ability to perform certain skills with different conditions after triggering retaliation. However, as I mentioned in that section as well, being hit at all allows her to enter the retaliation state. With dash attacks, you can time these so that she is hit while performing them, which allows her to perform a reduced cost EX special and also gain impact. However, this does come at the cost of needing to time this attack against enemies as opposed to just doing an EX special or performing a daze assist whenever you want. But what's actually most important to know here is that retaliation is much easier to activate after performing an assist follow-up, and this is currently what I found to be the most common scenario where retaliation is actually worth activating. Caesar, unlike other supportive characters, also just has a fantastic chain attack because it's fast to perform. This helps not only when trying to avoid spending too much time on a character while the boss is stunned, but it also allows her to activate Swing Jazz's 4-piece effect. This isn't always necessary since Protopunk, Freedom Blues, and Swing Jazz have their own pros and cons for Caesar specifically, but it's nice to have options like this. As a side note, I have seen some players attempt to try DPS Caesar, but as with all characters in ZenlessZoneZero, putting enough time, level, and investment into skills will inevitably result in damage being done. So with that being said, although I am not the biggest advocate of DPS Caesar over using her to protect my agents, she does have one of her highest damage multipliers on her chain attack, therefore there is even better value in performing this. And finally, on the topic of damage, we have Caesar's ultimate. This deals a pretty respectable amount of damage, and it does have the unique feature in dealing bonus damage to shielded enemies, but as with all supportive characters, it really isn't worth using unless you're building Caesar as a damage dealer. Caesar's skill priority is dependent on how much field time she'll be taking up, but here's a general ordering of priority. Her defensive assist is used very often and always important regardless of build or playstyle, but her EX special is equally as valuable too. Therefore, upgrading her EX special and defensive assist equally, followed by her basic, and then chain and dodge as the final two priorities, is a safe ordering to do for upgrades. Let's talk about combos. First, Caesar can be played with very little effort simply by performing defensive assists and gaining her shield through her EX special, but that's not the point of this section. If you do want to min-max her combos a bit more, here's what you need to know. Specifically against bosses, Caesar's best combo involves her performing a defensive assist, the defensive assist follow-up to this, and ending with an EX special attack. This is by far the highest amount of days that she can deal in most cases, and is also extremely quick to perform, so this is her go-to combo. Against several opponents or when fighting non-boss enemies, this can change to include a charged basic attack at the start of her rotation to vacuum enemies together, and then follow this with 2 casts of her EX special to trigger a chain attack. Truthfully though, the main damage dealer can make quick work of non-boss enemies with Caesar's buffs, and even supports like Nicole can actually be better for this purpose since her vacuum with EX special is easier to manage. However, Caesar, when you don't have access to these options, is still very comfortable to play and dazes multiple enemies fast too. Now there is something that I didn't mention from the EX special section that I decided to keep for the combo section, and that's the guard stance that Caesar enters when only the first part of her special attack is used. Caesar will crouch down and hold her shield to await an enemy attack, and this is actually useful in some cases. If you miss with her EX special, or if you're lacking in energy Entering this crouched guard stance via any special attack cast will allow you to enter retaliation mode while being hit, and if you recall, retaliation then allows you to cast an EX special at a reduced cost, so there are some scenarios where allowing yourself to cast a non-enhanced EX special will technically benefit you. However, this scenario that I'm describing is pretty specific in terms of when it's good or when you can find value in it, so consider this before performing it. Let's move along to her W engine now. Caesar's signature W engine is by far the best option for her because it's the first W engine with impact as its main stat, paired with an incredibly useful passive. Since many defensive characters also double as buffers and stunners, having impact at all is also incredibly valuable. This becomes even more obvious when considering Caesar's alternatives. They fall short in comparison with original Transmorpher as an option, but its HP percent boost offering very little value, and another alternative being using a stunner / daze class W engine, but Caesar literally can't use its effects since she's a defense agent using a stunner's W engine. Overall, any of these three options will work fine, but ultimately her signature is what will perform the best. It's difficult to say whether this W engine is 100% worth pulling for, but keep in mind that free-to-play options will perform worse but not be unusable. In that case, I personally would recommend using original Transmorpher if you have it available and leveled, but otherwise using a stunner's W engine if you have one of those leveled instead is definitely your next best option. Personally, I will be pulling for a W engine just because I like to have S ranks and their signatures, but if I didn't, I would definitely be using an A rank stunner W engine instead, simply because I'm not investing in original Transmorpher for a moderate stun increase. When it comes to sets, Caesar has 3 great choices depending on how you're using her. Freedom Blues is a great option if no one else on the team has it equipped, and if Caesar is paired with a physical agent like Jane or Piper, but do know that Caesar will lose value on the set if she isn't along said physical character. Additionally, the effect from Freedom Blues is unique per element per team, which just means that she can't use this set if another physical agent on the team also has this on. The effect from Freedom Blues will instead be worthless, so consider this when planning out your builds. Protopunk is another option in one of the 2 new sets that is being released in 1.2, and although it will require more time to farm this out, its passive synergizes perfectly with Caesar. The damage increase is definitely valuable for general purpose as well, but do understand that the anomaly buildup from Freedom Blues will typically outperform this damage increase from Protopunk, assuming Caesar's team is mostly anomaly. The final set Caesar can make use of is Swing Jazz, and in most cases this is very similar performing to Protopunk. The damage increase from Swing Jazz matches that of Protopunk, and aside from the fact that certain agents may be able to activate the passive effect easier, these 2 sets will perform pretty similarly. For Caesar specifically, she will be able to make use of both sets very easily since the energy regen and the shield increase from either set will help, but if you are pairing Caesar with someone like Seth, it would make more sense for Seth to be on Protopunk and Caesar to be on Swing Jazz, assuming Freedom Blues is not an option, since Seth has a longer chain attack than Caesar. For her 2-piece set effect, Disc Drive, Caesar really only has one option. The entirety of her kit revolves around impact, and therefore Shockstar Disco is her best option. This makes sense since it also contributes to her overall impact, but because everything scales and synergizes so well with dazing in her kit, this is the clear choice. If you aren't able to complete a 4-piece set effect except for Shockstar Disco, you can definitely use anything like Swing Jazz, Freedom Blues, or even Protopunk as the 2-piece set effect, but this is definitely not ideal. Caesar's stat priority definitely depends on who she's paired with and what kind of Caesar you're building, but impact is her focus no matter what. If she's being played with Anomaly as her secondary focus, a main stat of Anomaly proficiency on 4th slot, physical damage or attack percent on 5th slot, and impact of course on 6th slot is the distribution of main stats, but for substats, Anomaly based Caesar will definitely be looking just for Anomaly and attack percent throughout her disc drives, with any combination of flat attack and pen as her 2 potential final stats. For crit Caesar, the main and really only difference between this is a change to her 4th slot being crit rate or crit damage, and her substats now focusing more on attack percent, crit rate, and crit damage. Caesar will always want attack percent or physical on her 5th, and impact is always going to be meant for her 6th slot, so overall there aren't that many changes. Now her build options, though varied, are honestly not even that complicated, and this is actually a good thing for players who just want to build her quickly and get great value out of her. An anomaly based Caesar will be looking for roughly 2k attack, 275 anomaly proficiency, and her impact will need need to be a minimum of 150 to 160, with each of these stats increasing by roughly 10 to 20% if you're looking for a mid to end game build. Crit-based Caesar will still keep the 2000 attack baseline, but this time her crit rate and crit damage ratio should fall between 50 and 100 with a 1 to 2 ratio, or as close as this can get. Talking about a supportive character's Mindscapes is always somewhat difficult because the impact they will have is more dependent on the overall value that they give to the team, but for a character like Sokaku or Seth, their early Mindscapes actually increased the duration of their buffs, which made them incredibly powerful. This honestly feels similar for Caesar, but in a slightly different way. Though it doesn't increase buff durations, the additional 15% damage resistance reduction, alongside the instant Radiant Aegis shield that she can provide to the team every 300 seconds, makes her first Mindscape more quality of life, but also very impactful. Now, the reason for this is that the value from these Mindscapes are very easy to feel, both in terms of a QOL and in terms of the raw damage that it provides, but that's not even her best Mindscape. The second Mindscape is a pure numbers buff, and the impact it has is nice for players who find themselves running out of energy on Caesar. This is especially helpful if you find yourself breaking Caesar's barrier often, but the attack percent increase is definitely the winner here. Caesar's fourth Mindscape is actually one of the most creative and interesting Mindscapes ever introduced, with it actually replacing a resource entirely. Caesar gains an additional 3 assist points every time she chain attacks or ultimates, which is not super OP, but is nice given that it comes from the fourth Mindscape. However, it is really fascinating to again be able to see this additional assist point usage instead of just energy to cast her EX special. Creativity aside though, the value here may in some cases not appear nearly as valuable just because others have things like stun, daze, crit damage, etc. built into their fourth Mindscapes, but it is definitely true that this is effectively a cost substitution and not a direct damage increase, the same way that other Mindscapes contribute both increase in total casts, but also how much damage these casts are doing. Now, for whatever reason, most 6th Mindscapes on agents turn support characters into damage dealers, and Caesar is no different. Gaining crit rate and crit damage for her EX special and assist follow-up is honestly really funny, but normally her damage isn't nearly as insane as you'd imagine it to be anyways, so you kind of just spent $3,000 to gain her 6th Mindscape, and the value is not nearly as insane as other characters. Congratulations on the name card though. Now let's talk about teams. Truthfully, almost any team composition that Caesar is in will perform well, but these were a few teams I found to be successful. Whoa, just kidding buddy, get back here. I'm putting in another disclaimer and special note because somehow I keep getting asked how this will affect Korin and Nekomata's legacy, so let me be extra clear. These were the teams that I found to do very well, not the only teams that will ever work for Caesar. So in case you were mid-typing and asking why Nekomata and Korin were included, well, they simply didn't perform any of the other teams that I tested. Now, without further ado, the first and likely best team with Caesar is Jane Seth Caesar. This should be no surprise, but the feel, damage results, and overall synergies between these characters are fantastic. Seth and Caesar act as Jane's personal bodyguards and also buff her an insane amount, and between this and applying a ridiculous amount of daze against enemies that have assault on them, in addition to also being given a ridiculous amount of attack and anomaly proficiency through her buffs, Jane is honestly able to blow up any team that she wants with pretty much no one to contest her at all. Additionally, the barrier, the dodges, and honestly any of Jane's defensive options all simply act as safety nets, and this is fantastic since she's then able to abuse enemies that would otherwise flinch or interrupt her, and as always, this is great news for people who are really in love with rats. Caesar's next most interesting team is Juyu and Caesar, given the state of stunning in ZenlessZoneZero. For some players, Chingy was a skip since Jane was announced and caught everyone's attention while her banner was available, but skipping Chingy did mean losing one of Juyuan's best partners. That is until Caesar's announcement. Caesar does not daze at the same rate as Chingy, but she does offer decent damage the same way that Chingy does, alongside having an attack buff that Chingy lacks, but overall the attack increase and defense shred from Caesar and Nicole really make this team explode and does feel comparable to Chingy, although I do still think that Chingy is going to be absolutely insane. The final team concept that I believe will do well is any combination of Caesar alongside a crit DPS and a support. The last video I did described Caesar, Soldier 11, and Lucy as a potential 3-man team that could do extremely well, but then I tested this combo with different variations of crit carries like Ellen, and the results were the same. Therefore, having any damage dealer who can appreciate an attack increase like Juyuan or Ellen will definitely be able to make use of Caesar. However, keep in mind that certain characters will perform better if the enemy is stunned or if there is a certain alignment of elements. And so then in those cases, having other dedicated stunners like Kaleda or Ambi, or even having other characters that synergize better will be extremely valuable. Even with all that being the case though, having the barrier and being able to turn off my brain for enough time is honestly more than enough reason for me to pick it up too. Now normally I leave the should you pull for this X character explanation in a first impressions video, but I really wanted to emphasize how game changing this agent feels. The damage increases, the debuffs, and even the dazing are all nice when it comes to playing Caesar, but there is honestly something magical about not having to look at your health bar. Yes, the barrier breaking and you not caring about your health bar will cause some of the benefits to wear off, but plain and simple, there currently is no agent like Caesar in ZenlessZoneZero. No character provides the same level of ease and transformation value that a shield with anti-interrupt has, and since the barrier can be so easily replenished if you're good with managing your resources, this is absolutely ridiculous. I do want to preface that there are players who will die on the hill that limited supports will always be better than limited DPS, and I'm honestly inclined to agree with them, but this is because characters who are able to support or set up a damage dealer can be more universally valuable since the DPS can be replaced at any time. Furthermore, the idea of a new limited damage dealer feels way more common, especially when you think about old limited DPS and how relevant they are. Overall, I do think that pulling for characters that you find fun or enjoyable is more important than pulling based off of meta or performance, and honestly this feels even more justified by the fact that ZenlessZoneZero is an action combat game where you can always blame skill issue as the reason for you not beating opponents. But regardless guys, I'm gonna pull for Caesar. Feel free to do as you like. Thank you again for watching guys. I hope you guys enjoyed, hope you guys learned something. If you did, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe, and I'll see you all on the next one. Thanks again for watching guys. This was my Caesar King guide. I'll see you all next time. Good night.